Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Daniels, and I'm the program leader for Native Seed Communities, which is a project of the Indiana Native Plant Society. I'm really happy to see so many people here tonight, and I'm glad you joined us to hear Bill Deeter's presentation on collecting and propagating native tree seeds. Before Ray introduces Bill, I'd like to share with you some of the information on native seed communities. So let me share my screen, please. Actually, I can't see, so let me okay, can everybody see me?
I do see you, Bill.
Oh, okay, great. All right, let me, what's going on here? It's actually doing some funky things. All right, my screen has done a little bit different. I think you're seeing my notes, right? Let me go to slideshow. All right, now you can see me, right? Okay. Who we are, Native Seed Communities promotes networks of native plant enthusiasts working together to regionally procure, process, and propagate native plant seeds to increase the presence of ecologically appropriate native plants in all of our landscapes. And these are just some of the pictures of projects, activities that have been done, from collecting seed. This was with our Sycamore Land Trust. Top right, we on the right-hand side, we're potting up some seeds or some seedlings. Down below to the left, we're sowing some seeds that we collected. And then we've got a sale that we did with MC Iris last year here in Bloomington. We do have a lot of resources on growing native plants from seed, and one of our major resources is our website materials with Indiana Native Plant Society. We'll be sharing this information in the chat. We've also got a Trello board. Many of you maybe haven't worked with Trello, but we've got a lot of information on there as well, including the presentations that we've been doing over the past 5-6 months. We also have a YouTube channel that you can access our presentations. Our next presentation is going to be next month on June the 19th, Monday at 7 p.m. And we'll be hearing from Andy Grinstead. He is the project manager for Pollinator Partnership, the project specifically, Project Wingspan. So looking forward to that, and hoping many of you will be able to come to that. We also have social media. We've got Facebook as well as Instagram. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Ray.
Our speaker, Bill Deeter, was born in Indiana, and he's lived in Indiana and Michigan his entire life. Bill has a lifelong interest in the outdoors and the natural world. His youth in southern Michigan was spent in the forest and lakes and streams and marshes, and they got marshes, studying the flora and fauna of the region. He also knew several old-time woodsmen who shared their knowledge and were great resources in his youth. Bill planted his first red maple seeds in 1967, and he began to learn the art of grafting at that time as well. He's well read in natural history, forestry, forest ecology, and environmental sciences. Bill's work was in grocery management, but he's never stepped away from his true passion for growing trees. His primary interest is in the native trees. He's worked with about 90 different species over the years. He and his wife own 4 parcels of land that are dedicated to tree propagation research and to nut tree planting. Bill has a special interest in 2 species, and he's worked for 25 years in planting and restoring the American chestnut and the butternut. He also works on reforestation projects for friends and advises others on native trees and how to deal with invasive plants. Currently, 98% of Bill's plantings are done by direct seeding, and that's what he's here to talk to us primarily about this evening. Tree seed is readily available and it's usually free to gather. Bill has learned how to handle, store, and stratify and protect tree seed from pathogens. He publishes educational posts on several media platforms to help others in their activities in tree propagation, wildlife habitat enhancement, in the interactions of these disciplines. I've been corresponding with this gentleman for about 4 years, and folks, it's really my pleasure to give you Bill Deeter. Bill, if you will.
Yes. How do you see me? Yes. I appreciate being invited to this media today and hopefully help with some understanding of different ways of collecting, storing, cleaning, and planting different seeds. I picked 7 different Indiana species for tonight. Some of these are unusual, maybe not the most common to some of us, but they're trees that I work with a lot. And I see interest in them from other people as well. And I usually start my seed collecting right now in the spring, basically by checking out, see what trees are flowering. And then I have a pretty good method of recording when I collect tree seed in the summer, fall, winter even. And right now, like in northern Indiana, we were very fortunate to miss a lot of these really bad frosts we had, and everything is flowering nicely. In fact, the 4 Yellowwoods I have planted around my house, I grew from seed in 1997, 45 foot tall. They're all flowering. They're all around my house, and it's beautiful. But anyway, back to what we're doing here. I'm going to start with one species here. The first one will be Pawpaw. A lot of us are familiar with that here in Indiana. Also called Indiana banana. You go up Michigan, they call it Michigan banana, but I'm going to call it Indiana banana. But this is a fruit. It's an ancient plant. It has a edible pulp in it. It's actually a berry. It's not a like a banana. It is a berry, actually. It has a number of lima bean shaped sized seeds in it. These things in northern Indiana, at least, start to become ripe September 15th through October 20th. Usually, you can collect them. I usually collect a little later because they're better. I think the later ones are better to choose because they came from trees that flowered a little later. And I like later vegetating trees if I can get them. But the fruit is excellent. These, my wife and I have one particular woods that has probably about 12 to 15,000 stems in it. So 20 acres, and they're everywhere. It's like a tropical forest. And not all those produce fruit yet, but they do produce quite a bit. Some years I could take 3 pickup loads out, but they're very good eating. They're high in amino acids. Wildlife eat them. I see a lot of different animals that eat the ripe fruit. You can smell it in the woods when you walk back in early October. It just smells really sweet back in there. All these wildlings, as I call them, putting out all this ripe fruit. And we can go to the next slide, please. Here's some of the seed that I collected. I collect from different trees. There's some that have a yellow flesh. Most of them are yellow fleshed fruit. And then there's some that are actually orange fleshed, which is really sweet. And I could graft those if I wanted to keep those particular cultivars, if I want to call it that. But I like planting seed better. I always like to plant seed, and it's available. And it's free to me to use. It has all the information inside that little seed coating, and all I have to do is make sure that I take care of it. Now, pawpaw seed is very perishable. And once I get it out of the fruit, I clean all the membranes off the seed and keep it into a moist media. Put it in my fridge usually, and then I'll plant them out. A lot of times direct seed them in the fall, and then I'll also direct seed some in the spring, because I always keep a lot of seed in my seed fridge for friends. I always have people asking me for them. I have a huge amount of pawpaw seed at any point I could get in my woodlands. And I've had I started with one woods that had pawpaws, but I've moved them around into my other woods, and I have now established pawpaws in all my woodland areas. They're doing quite well, and it was in areas that didn't have any pawpaws before, but now the wildlife can benefit from that. You want to keep pawpaws, like I say, moist. You can put them in a freezer bag with pinholes with a little media in there, peat moss or just peat. And they need 33 to 38 degrees for at least 90 to 120 days. I would prefer a little longer myself. They are tardy in germinating. You plant those things even the fall or the spring. Sometimes you won't see them come up till late June or even early July. A lot of people get worried about that, but don't worry. Pawpaws have been around a while. They know how to take care of their their germinating times. Next slide, please. Here is 4 pails. These are 4-gallon pails. I collected these, and I think about around an hour in one of my woods one fall. And most of these are just getting ripe. A lot of times people will eat these when they get a little browner colored. I like to eat them when they're kind of a yellowish color. And I give these to friends, and I process some of the pulp myself, and you can make like bread pudding out of it. You can make smoothies, you can make ice cream, all kinds of things you can make out of pawpaws. You do want to peel that skin off. It's very astringent. I tell people don't cut through the flesh after you've used a paring knife on that skin, because you'll push that astringency right through the flesh. And some people get upset. They think pawpaws taste terrible because unfortunately they had the bad experience of getting an astringency in the flesh of the pawpaw. But again, this is a native fruit to Indiana. It's our largest berry, largest native fruit. And it's an understory tree, only gets like 12 to 25 feet tall, sometimes a little taller. But you'll find these basically pawpaws growing in lowland areas. They like rich soil, but I've had them growing in sand dunes before up in Michigan. So they're very versatile. And there is I think it's the tiger swallowtail. You might be correcting me. Zebra swallowtail, maybe a butterfly that feeds on the leaves, but very few other things do. Pawpaw is one of the few things that deer will not actively browse. I mean, they have to be starving to do it. But it's really a neat plant. Has a lot of good medicinal qualities. There's been a lot of patents on the use of pawpaw extracts for different things, and in cancer research, in fact. But the high amino acid content you have in the high protein of pawpaws make them a really versatile and healthful food. I think that's all I have for pawpaws. And if anybody has questions at this time.
There is a question, Bill, and that's about harvesting them. Do you pick them from the tree? Do you wait till they fall? And if you pick them from the tree, how do you judge ripeness? I have a method, but you certainly must too.
Well, yeah, those are good questions. And a lot of times when I go back, like as I mentioned, actually I use my nose. If I can smell the wood smelling sweet, I smell a certain aroma that they put out when they're ripening. I start looking at the fruit themselves then, and I'll just barely touch them with my fingers. And if they give a little bit easily, I go ahead and pick them. I don't pick them off the ground too often because they usually have already been eaten by something. Once they hit the ground, they're ripe, they break. Animals get to them: possums, squirrels, mice, raccoons. I've even seen fox chewing on them before. And but I pick them from the tree. Basically, I shake the tree lightly. You don't want to shake very hard because you'll have like 30 of these things come down. You better have a hard hat on sometimes. They average around 5-6 ounces, but I have some I've gotten over a pound before. And sometimes I'll take a little catcher net, one of those big ones in clusters, and I'll put the little net up under it and just shake them inside the net, and I have an extension handle on it, and I catch them that way. That way they aren't bruised when they fall, because a lot of times they fall, they just bust all over the place. So picking them from a tree is basically what I do. And I check the ones down below after I've smelled the air, and I find out that everything's ripe and he's starting to ripen. I generally just look at the kind of a yellowish tint will tell me, a clear yellowish tint on the skin tell me they're probably ready for me to pick. They are perishable. I take them home. If they're not completely ripe, I sit them on my counter. In a couple of days, they're ready to go. You can put them in the fridge and they'll stay a little longer, but they start turning grayish brown then. A lot of people like to eat them at that point. I hope that answers your question.
I believe it answers the question that was here, and we certainly agree about simply lifting on the fruit cluster a little bit, and if they're ready, you can feel it. They come off and come out in your hand if they're truly ripe. That's right. I don't see other questions. Oh, well, they ask about time of year in your area. That's in mid-October, perhaps?
Yeah, September 15th is when I first start noticing them starting to ripen, but basically the best time is October 1st through October 15th. That's when they're absolutely going to be. I've had them hang on as late as early November, but that's pretty rare because the wind usually knocks them off by that point.
How does this vary between your Indiana properties and your Michigan properties? I suppose there's a considerable distance north to south. Is that right?
Yeah, my Michigan property is 300 miles north of where I live here in Marshall County.
And you
And
have pawpaws there.
yes, I've planted them up there. They're not producing yet. They're still young trees. They are growing in a sandy loam soil underneath northern red oaks, hard maples, paper birch, and hemlocks. And
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I try I plant seeds from trees in so many different locations. I've learned so much about how adaptable they are to different sites. And, you can read all the books you can on silviculture and dendrology and things of that nature, but until you get out there and do it yourself, you really don't have a full scope of what trees can do. I mean, where they can survive. Like I say, I've seen these things growing in lowland, really rich, dark loam, and also growing right out of sand dunes. So, you don't hear that too much about sand dunes. They do, they can, and not the best habitat for them, but it just illustrates how adaptable the plant is.
Here is one last Pawpaw question, and that is about soil type. How does soil type affect the fruit taste, the richness of it? Do you have any views on that?
I don't scientifically know that, but anecdotally, I really haven't noticed a difference. I would imagine that the lowland soil areas, if there's a good, rich organic layer, they probably get the best nutrients, and they probably have a slightly better as far as nutrient value than if they're growing out of a sandy loam soil. But the taste is about the same, I've noticed, from different areas. Now, white-fleshed pawpaws are kind of, I think, are a little bit sour. So I usually stick with the yellow or the orange flesh, and there's a difference there. And I know some people have had bad experiences with white-fleshed pawpaws. It's just a different variety. They just don't have the sugar content, I think, or something of that nature, something chemically about them. But the yellow and the orange are really good. They're very sweet and excellent. I think that if your soil does have a lot of high organic content, you're probably gonna get the best possible product, though.
Very good. Well, that entails the pawpaw questions, mostly about the food value, of course, and edibility and so forth. Go ahead.
Okay, now we're at American chestnut. This is a species I've been working on for a quarter of a century, trying to restore. I actually started buying land just so I could start planting American chestnut, because I don't know what it is about American chestnut trees. I felt so bad for them being killed off by the blight when they were such a dominant plant here in the east of the Mississippi up until around 1900 when the blight started killing them. I had a lot of people that said it was a red herring for me to try this, planting American chestnuts to save the species, so to speak. And I went ahead and did it, no matter what the horticulturalists, the foresters, and the scientific community that I spoke with back in those days would tell me. And I learned a lot about growing chestnut trees. And I could have an entire presentation easily, but I won't get into everything. But American chestnut is on the edge of being restored back to our forests. There's I'm part and parcel of a number of groups have been working on this, and this group up in SUNY, it's a State University of New York. They've been working on. They inserted a gene from wheat, which we get in our food anyway, that oxidizes the fungal toxins when it's a fungus that kills our chestnut trees. When it injects the fungus into the bark, this wheat gene that's activated in the genome of the chestnut oxidizes this toxin, and the tree can survive with a minimal wound on it and will just callus over and keep growing. This is extremely exciting. The big thing is we're waiting on deregulation by the USDA. This has been in process for about 20 some years, and it looks like maybe this year it'll happen. We'll have the pollen available. The thing is, you had to have pure American mother trees to pollinate with this pollen. And then 50% of the seed that are produced from the pollinations, they call it the OXO pollen, only 50% of those are going to inherit the gene. So then we have to sort through those. We have a way of doing it, but we are very on the cusp of getting this tree back. It's a gorgeous tree, beautiful, fast growing, almost as fast growing as a tulip tree. They get to a large size quickly. I have American chestnuts I planted from seed that are in 23 years ago that are now over 60 foot tall. And yes, they do get blight eventually. They're not resistant. They're just lucky. But in the meantime, as I've been planting these things, direct seeding them for all these years and protecting them, I've produced many hundreds of trees that are flowering. So I have plenty of mother trees I can start pollinating once we get deregulation. So this is a huge thing for me. And I think it's going to be great for everybody when we get the American chestnut back into our forests, and the wildlife will benefit, people will benefit. They are long lived. They will be good at carbon sequestration. They're a beautiful timber tree. I can go on and on, but anyway, this picture here illustrates a typical terminal end of a branch. Those I probably picked in September. Those are 4 burrs on there, and each burr has 3 viable seeds in it. Please move to the next slide. You see these burrs, they up here in my area around September 28th, October 16th is when I start to harvest my American chestnut seed. American chestnut seed is so edible that you don't want to wait till it falls on the ground, because everything will eat it. It doesn't need a chance to bounce twice. Crows, jays, raccoons, foxes, deer, everything eat it. And if you notice, these burrs have these dark areas in them. Those are like, I call them suture lines. And that burr is starting to separate. And once it gets to that point, I just pop those burrs right off the stem of the tree, because the seeds are still contained, and I can just lay them out at home on screening, and they'll open up for me. I can get the seeds out without fighting with the wildlife to get some chestnut seed. But again, throughout the process, they're very perishable. You need to keep them from drying out, put them in the fridge right away. And I use a freezer bag. I don't use storage bags. I use freezer bags with pinholes. There's something about the thicker millage. It helps preserve the seed better. And that's true for a lot of different seed that I do put in the fridge. I don't put these in my stratification pits because they would germinate in the ground, but I can keep an eye on them in my fridge, in my seed fridge during the winter and early spring. Please go to the next slide. Here's an open burr with 3 viable seeds in it. This is commonly what I see when I have good pollinations. And you have to have 2 trees minimum to have viable seed because they're dioecious and they have to have another tree to pollinate them. I have no problem. A lot of times I have, 20 to 50 trees in one area, so pollination is not a problem in my orchards and plantings. But those seeds right there, they're in a velvety little capsule, and you just pop them up with your finger real easy at this stage. They're ready to fall right out. If they're hanging on the tree, the birds would be knocking them out and they would be on the ground and eaten by anything that would grab them, which is just about, like I say, everything. But those are good seeds right there. Next slide, please. When I collect these burrs, like I say, I collect them by hand from the trees, or I shake them onto a tarp. Sometimes if they're weak enough, they'll break off and fall on the tarp below me. And I'll be up on tall ladders because my trees are getting really tall now. But I put them in these mesh onion bags temporarily because I don't want them to overheat. Do not put these things in buckets. If you put them in buckets or boxes, they overheat and you lose your viability of the seed. They don't stay in those bags for more than a day with me, and I get them on the screens to dry them out so that the burrs continue to pop open and I can collect the seeds. And actually during a day, I'll probably go down the basement 2 or 3 times and just keep collecting seeds as they pop out. Put those into the fridge right away to keep them cool and so they don't lose moisture. But these onion bags are really good for lots of different seeds. And I used to save them when I worked at the supermarket. I had people save them from the produce department, and you can also buy them online, but I got them for free, and I got hundreds and hundreds of these. Luckily, I saved, and they're very useful for when you have large amounts of seed or fruit that keep it from overheating, because overheating will always happen if you leave it in a bucket too long, and it doesn't matter what kind of seed it is. You don't want it to overheat. Especially when we collect in September, even into October, it's still too warm for seed to be clustered up. So I can't stress that enough. Next slide, please. Here's some of the seeds that I extracted from the burrs. They're about the size of a penny or so, sometimes a little bigger. And the germination rate on American chestnut seed is really high. It's around 95% or better. I plant these in the fall a lot of times with little protective cages. I know Drosty cans, I believe it's called. A lot of people use those. And I use hardware cloth. It just depends what kind of predators you got, rodent predators around to keep them off of your seed, because they will dig them up. But I say in the spring, these things they'll start putting a root down before it's actually warm enough. And once they get started, that's the same way with oaks a lot of times too. Once they get started, they start growing like crazy. I get 2 to 3 feet of growth in my first year with American chestnut. But these trees, these seeds are pure Americans, and I treat them they're so valuable to me. I never eat these. People always ask me if I eat them. I said, no, I've got Chinese chestnuts. I eat those. I don't want to eat anything I'm trying to restore. But last fall, I think I collected 4,500 seed. I probably left 25 to 30,000 in the field. I just couldn't get it all. I had so many different tree seed I was collecting, but you do what you can do. This last January, I was elected to the Indiana chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation as president, which I didn't expect, but they did. And I'm going to be working on getting these into these seeds from these different orchards and getting more of them collected so that people can start growing pure Americans out to have mother trees going forward. They start bearing female flowers at 8 years of age. So it won't take long to have a lot of American chestnuts to utilize the OXO pollen on eventually. And I continue to put more and more orchards out in different areas to keep these trees going. And that's a big passion of mine, is trying to restore this tree back to its rightful place in the forest. Next slide, please. Here's a bag. This is a Ziploc freezer bag, and I just roughly put in about 400 seed in each gallon bag, and I punch little pinholes in it, and I don't put any moisture in there. They have enough native moisture with them that I put them in my fridge and keep my temp between 33 and 38. They can stay viable and without sprouting right on up through the middle of April, sometimes even late April. But by then I've usually had them planted, or I've sent them out to people for them to use. But these freezer bags, I keep touting that. They're better than storage bags for some reason. I think it has something to do with the mill, thick mill on the plastic. But yeah, you don't add any water to these because they'll mold. Any media you put in there is going to also cause them to mold a little bit. This, I know that goes against conventional wisdom, but I've been doing this for years and I almost never have any molded chestnuts when I do it like this. Their natural moisture keeps them going in the fridge during stratification. Next slide, please. This is another tree. This is another Indiana native.
Bill, there was, if I may, there was one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Got some questions. Yes.
And the question is about soils, specifically heavy clays. What are the best soils for chestnut in your opinion?
Chestnut, the best soil for chestnut is a well-drained soil. It can be sandy loam. It can be the dark loam. They don't like wet feet. You want to avoid wet ground. Clay is a bit tough for American chestnut. If it's just little clay bands in between sand and loam, you're fine. But if it's a thick clay like you get in northeastern Indiana, that brown or even that blue clay, they don't do well on that. I've found that they will languish. They get the moisture in that clay stays there too long, and they get root rot real easy in heavy clay. So you want a well-drained site. Even rocks, gravel, stone is fine, as long as there's a little bit of organic material also that's available. But if you want to avoid real heavy clay or wet areas with chestnut.
Good. Continue with the cucumber magnolia then, if you will. Okay.
Cucumber magnolia is native to about 3 or 4 counties in southeastern Indiana. It is a very fast growing tree. It's related distantly to our tulip trees. A great thing about cucumber magnolia is it has almost no pests or pathogens, unlike elms and ash and chestnuts and butternuts. They're extremely long lived. There's one in Ohio that's 8 feet in diameter and it's 440 years old and still producing seed. I like these trees. They're really going to be awesome. I think someday they're going to be realized to be a really good yard shade tree. I mean, I find big ones scattered here and there on old estates or old homesteads or cemeteries. They're just gorgeous trees. And they do have some food value for wildlife. The little berries that come out of the follicles are eaten by a lot of species of bird. This tree here in front of you on this picture is 18 feet tall. It grew from seed, and I gave the seedling to a friend of mine, and that tree is, I think, 13 years old, and it's 18 feet tall, and also in full sunlight was producing seed in its 12th year. Next slide, please. Here's some cucumber magnolia pods. These usually start coming down. Squirrels cut them a lot of times, or the wind will knock them down starting in early September around Labor Day and on up into early October. And you can see the one has those little orangish red seeds in there. Those are starting to pop out of the follicles of that pod. And I usually let those sit on a drying rack, and they'll come out even further a lot of times. That way I can pick them out, but you don't want to use a metal pick or awl or anything like that, because you'll crush them. The seed is a hard coat seed inside that areole. That red thing is the areole, the fleshy outer coating. But the seed, the hard coated seed is real thin and can crush easily. So you want them to pop out as far as you can. If they don't come out far enough, soak them in water, warm water overnight, and then they pop out real easy. And then you can just take those. You have to clean the areoles off though. No, I'll show you in the next slide. I think it is. Next slide, please. Here's the fruit hanging in the tree, and the seeds are popping out of follicle. This is actually perfect when they're like this, because those you can just take your hand and brush them right off the old seed pod follicle. And there's a little elastic band on each one of those, and they hang. If you let it hang there, the birds will see them bouncing around in the air and they grab them. It's just the way the tree disperses its seed. It's like a little latex rubber band, basically. But I collect these things when they're like this. This is perfect. It's time to collect them. Next photo, please. Here's a seed I've taken out of the follicles, and I'm getting ready to clean it. I soak these things in water. Sometimes I'll put them in the fridge for a couple of weeks, and I let them blut a little bit, and it basically rot down a little bit, the areole. And then I put them in water, and I use my hands to just squeeze them and stuff underwater, and it pops all those little areoles off of the little black seed. And you need to get it off, because magnolias have a germination inhibitor in the flesh of that fruit. So that has to be taken off. Next slide, please. Here's a seed after I've cleaned it, rinsed it several times, and as you can see, it's black and they're small. They're about the size of a double-sized apple seed, and you need to keep these moist. You can't let a magnolia seed dry out. Now you can put media with these. They will get moldy occasionally. If you got some fungicidal spray you can put in on the media. If it's the best media, it would be some sterile peat, perlite mixture. Just you can spray a little fungicide in there, but they need about 120 to 150 days cold, moist stratification in 33 to 38 degrees. They are kind of temperamental. You can plant these things. You can direct seed them in the fall. It's probably the best way to do it. If you store them in the fridge and plant them in the spring, they are tardy in germinating, and viability is not real good. Sometimes it's only about 70–75%. A lot of these trees don't get pollinated correctly, and some of them have empty seeds. So you might want to crush a few when you collect it, and make sure they have a viable embryo inside. Next slide, please. That's just a little close up what they look like, and there's some little particles of areole still on these. I can see them, they're a little bit orange. If you see that on there, I like to take a paper towel and just wipe the seed on there, and they'll come right, the areole will come right off, whatever's left. Another thing you can do is you can put some Dawn dish detergent in a little container and put your seeds in there and stir it up and soak them for about an hour or two, and that will lift the oil. That's what the areole is basically. It's a fatty oil, and it'll lift the oil right off the seed coat, and then you can store them. Then it's really good. Dawn dish detergent is great for cleaning seeds. All right, next slide, please. Oh, questions, please.
There were no questions given about cucumber magnolia, so you may wish to continue.
Okay, butternut. This is a tree that's threatened by a disease, just like similar to chestnut, has been taken out of our landscape. There's still some out there, and there's a few that are somewhat resistant. We've been grafting and putting them into seed orchards. In fact, Ray, down there, where there's probably there's a place down in southern Indiana. We have a seed orchard,
I do know the Huntingburg Orchard. That's the one you mean? Yes, sir. I know
Yes.
what it is.
Yeah, and those trees were collected from all over the central region of, they were the mother trees are survivors while everything else around them was dying. These were survivors. So we grafted those. My friend Jim McKenna, who was at Purdue at the time, did that orchard, put it in. He did all the grafting, and he has like 50 different trees represented in their clones. And we fertilize that, and they produce pretty heavily every year. We're trying to bring this tree and restore this tree back as well. That fruit in my hand there is pretty good size for a butternut, but they have that sticky coat on the outside. It's really sticky, and you notice it when you pick up a butternut. Next slide, please. That's the seed cleaned off. It's ridged. It's a very hard seed, hard to crack too. But again, this is the type of seed I like to put in the fall. I do put some in the spring, direct seeding. They get plenty of cold, moist stratification if you put them in the fall, and that will get them to germinate. Usually about now they're starting to pop, and sometimes they'll wait a little bit, maybe till June before they start to germinate. Okay,
And that's probably under hardware cloth as well.
Yeah, I use hardware, especially in places where there's a lot of red squirrels. Red squirrels are terrible about getting into butternuts. I don't know why, they just really prefer them. Yeah, and here's a black walnut huller friend of mine, and I take my butternuts to him and I dump them into their hopper here, and they can run. I ran 1,000 pounds of those things through in about 25-30 minutes 2 years ago. I was timing it, and they clean them off really well. And it's better than trying to run over them with your car in the driveway, believe me. Next picture, please. There's the cleaned nuts right after they've come out of the walnut huller, and they are in good shape. They're ready to plant. I put them in mesh bags again, like I say, but I don't keep them there very long. They go into a cooler, and we plant them at a nursery up here in northern Indiana. And that nursery has been selling some of our seedlings the last few years. We've had several thousand each year we've been able to sell. They always sell out of them, it seems like. And we're doing it basically for restoration. A lot of the seed that we produce from these orchards also go to the Hoosier National Forest. They're planting a lot of those seedlings in the Hoosier National Forest. They bare root them. So we're trying to help restore them into different forests as well. Next slide, please.
Well, there's a question or two. What's the ripening period in your area for butternut?
Butternut, usually you want to look at about Labor Day is when you start to see, if they drop in August, I generally don't save those. The August drops are usually not filled. Sometimes they are, but I usually wait till the first week of September, and then they're usually done by October 10th or 12th usually. I get them really fast because again, wildlife like to pick them up, the squirrels mainly. They're the main predator of butternut seed.
And can you share the source of the nursery where they can be purchased?
Yeah, Hensler's Nursery here in northern Indiana. Hensler's has been around for about 70 years.
Hensler's is well known, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the Hensler family are really, really good to us. They've given us a lot of bed space. We plant a lot of stuff up there to help with restoration, chestnut, butternut, you name it. But they're great. They're a great organization, and
then reputable dealers for seed for both butternut and chestnut.
You want to know?
The questioner wants to know how to find seed, how to purchase or acquire seed for chestnut and butternut.
Well, if you want pure American seed, it can be tricky because there's a lot of people who have seed that they say are, but they have Chinese chestnut around them, and they get pollinated by Chinese chestnut real easy. I'm working actually through our Indiana chapter, American Chestnut Foundation. I'm working on how we're going to distribute some seed to people who are members in the state. I've been doing it myself, sending them out to people, but I have to tell you, I've made way too many trips to the post office, and I got to find a better way of getting seed to people. My stuff is pure, and I know a lot of people want it, but I have to find another way to facilitate getting it out to people. And we're working on that right now with our Indiana chapter, American Chestnut Foundation. Butternut seed, generally, we just put that right into the orchards and plant it right away for the winter. And the seedlings will be available through Henslers. That's the butternut seed. We don't usually save that for selling to people or anything like that. I do give some out to people. I hesitate to say that because one time I did that and I had like 40 requests on my messenger for seed, but I do send seed out to people when I have it available until it's gone, and that's all I can do at this point. But we're going to try to figure out something with butternut as well.
Okay, those yes, those are the questions. So yeah, we're familiar down here with viburnum prunifolium, but tell us about rusty blackhaw.
If I may, gentlemen, I just want to give it a time check. It's about 10 till.
Go ahead, Bill.
So, Bill, you've got about 10 minutes. So,
all right, I'll do my best here. Rusty blackhaw.
Okay.
It's related to your common blackhaw. It reaches the southern part of Indiana. It is a gorgeous little tree. I think it would be a great replacement for the calorie pear. It doesn't have thorns, produces a lot of fruit. It is very heat and drought tolerant. Tough tree. It only gets about 25 feet tall. This one is about 25 feet in this picture here. That's a mature one, about 40 years old probably. We can go to the next slides here. I'll just briefly mention here's the flowering time of the rusty blackhaw. They were just out here about a week ago. They were really full. I mean, those trees that I have up here, they were planted trees, and they were just loaded, beautiful, and they're a really good bee tree. Pollinators love them. Next picture, please. Here's the fruit. The fruit can hang on the tree well into winter, and I collected about 12 pounds of this fruit from 2 trees in December 21st last winter, and it's edible to people and animals. It tastes kind of like a sweet prune, and has a texture of it as well. And these seeds, you can plant them in the fruit like that. It takes like 2 years before they germinate. The first year in the ground, the summer, they put a root down, and it's the second year that they break the soil. And you can mix some of the leaves. I found out from a friend of mine, you take some of the old leaves from this tree and mix it with your seed, and there's some chemicals in there that help this germination of the blackhaw, rusty blackhaw, viburnum germinate a little bit easier. I just punch these in the ground all over the place in edges and stuff. They can take a little shade, but I like to get them in sunlight where they're going to produce fruit. Next slide, please. Yeah, there's just a bucket. I'm just finishing up. I knock them off onto a tarp and dump them in a bucket. And like I say, I had about 12 pounds of seed I collected, and I clean some of this seed, but some of it I just plant. And cleaning it be like the magnolia. I just soak it, blood it, let it rot down a little bit, and then wash it carefully with my hands in a bucket, and I can get the seed cleaned off pretty good by rinsing it a couple more times. And then I put it in cold storage until I can sow it in the spring, and then just got to wait. That first summer, this summer, for instance, the ones I sowed this spring, they'll put a root down, and this time next year we'll have little baby blackhaws, rusty blackhaws coming up. Next slide, please. Sassafras, very common in the state. A lot of us know about it. I didn't realize people liked this plant as much as I did. I had so many people ask for seed from me when I posted about collecting some seed. Right here, what you see right there is the pedicles. Those little red things are the pedicle the seed sits on top of. Those green ones are not ripe yet. This is probably in early August, late July. Next slide, please. And this is what they look like about up here in northern Indiana. Around the 15th to the 20th of August, they start ripening like this. And then they turn dark blue. They're ready to collect. And I'll just go up and on a ladder and I'll just brush them with my hands and they fall right off down on the tarp underneath. Or sometimes I even take a rake and reach up and shake branches and they'll just rain down on my tarp. And you do this quickly because the birds see you do it. They come flying in and they start grabbing them right away. The birds love them. They disperse them quite easily. But generally, there's about a 3-week window you can collect this seed from late to or from middle August until about the 10th or the 10th of September or so. Next slide, please. Here's some seed I just collected. Within an hour after collecting it, there's like probably 3 pounds there. I put it in the fridge, keep it cool because it was 86 degrees that day. I will come back later and clean these. And the seed it's about the size of a BB. I'll blet these as well, just like the magnolia and the blackhaw, and run water over them and squish them, squeeze them with my hands to keep from damaging them. The seed's pretty hard though. The sassafras seed's real hard, like a BB. And you can just go ahead and sow those in the fall and they'll germinate the next spring. Occasionally they wait a second spring. I've found a few of them do, but they're pretty amendable to germination. Got a high germination rate, probably 85% for me. But yeah, again, I'd store it in a freezer bag until I can clean them up and keep them nice and cool so they don't overheat. Any questions on sassafras?
There aren't questions on it here. I think we want to know about this next one though, so go right ahead.
Okay.
Yellowwood.
Yellowwood, one of our rarest native trees in Indiana. I first became interested in this in the early 90s and I first saw a few of them down in Brown County, and I found out later that that's about the only, at that time they said was the only place that Yellowwood existed natively. So I started planting them almost immediately. As soon as I had some ground, I planted seeds and grew little seedlings and grew and planted in my yard in 1997, as I mentioned earlier. Those trees are all 45 feet or 50 feet tall now and draping all over around my house, east, west, north, and south. Beautiful flowers. It has a very vanilla, lemony smell to it. And normally they only produce flowers every other or every second year, but I've noticed they start producing, when they get older, they produce almost every year some seed. And again, this year, some of my trees are real heavy, and last year was a heavy year too. And this is a very desirable shade and ornamental tree to have. It's rare, but it doesn't have too many disease problems. I'll move on to the rest of the Yellowwood. Next slide.
Can you talk a moment about the physical dormancy of the seed?
The seed of Yellowwood is it's got a hard coat on it, and it's a legume. I have kept seed for as long as 6 years in dry, cold stratification. Dry, not wet. Dry, cold stratification. 6 years, just barely scarified them with very fine sandpaper and soaked them in some warm water, not hot water. They'll imbibe the water. As soon as you see them swell up, put them in a pot or in the ground immediately, because they will sprout a radical within 24 hours. It's incredible. I think that you could probably germinate these things after 10 years if you stored them right. So it's a good thing that we can store them a long time, because there's a lot of years you just can't get Yellowwood seed. But if you've stored it, you can plant it every year. And if you have a nursery, or if you want to put some in your properties, or pot them up and grow them, they're pretty easy to grow once you do that. You as I say, you scarify them just barely with real fine sand, 600 grit or 1,000 grit sandpaper. Just barely rub them on there. Put them in warm water. They imbibe. You'll see them swell. Plant them immediately. And that's the way I usually do it. When I plant them out on my property sometimes without even scarifying them, and they'll pop up in a year or two. But if I want to get going that first year, you have to scarify them a little bit and get them to imbibe some water. Here's some freshly harvested pods. I got these, generally I harvest those around Labor Day again. And I've gone into late winter before. They'll hang in a tree for a while. But I try to get them as early as I can where they have already ripened. When the pods get to that tan color, they're ready to pick. So I don't want to take a risk on losing them to a windstorm or, anything else could happen to them. But it's easy to collect a lot of these pods, and each pod has 2 to 3 seeds on average, sometimes 4 or 5. And they're usually fairly viable. Sometimes you get some years. Last year was a bad year for some areas. I noticed the seed was not viable in a lot of areas. Don't know why. But I had a lot of trees that had good seed myself that I planted. I've got about 70 trees I planted in my properties, and about 20 of them are producing at this point right now. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, here's your seed close up. It's like a little tiny kidney bean. It's got the hard seed coat, and again, dry cold stratification is the way to go with Yellowwood seed. And it will store for at least 6 years, probably longer. Okay, next slide. Oops, that one's upside down. Looks like that picture. I put stratification pits, I call them, out in the country. And what that is basically I take my hard mast like black walnut, butternut, shellbark, shagbark hickory, any hickories, and I put them in these hardware mesh baskets, and I seal them up really tight because animals will dig down underneath the soil to get to them. And I put the seed between 6 and 16 inches underground, mix it with sand inside those baskets, and you'll see the pictures of the baskets here shortly. But they go through the winter on this north side of these white pines, for instance, because it stays more consistently cold. And I get 4.5 months usually cold moist stratification in there. And I get 90 to 92% germination with those hard mast nuts when I do it that way. I think it's a lot better than the fridge method for hard mast anyway. But yeah, you have to seal them real tight because red squirrels and mice will dig down to get them. But if you have them on that north side, that'll keep them good. Yeah, here's a basket.
Referring there to hickory, walnut, perhaps the durable acorns as well, then the red oaks.
You could probably do the red and black oaks, but I would dig them up. See, I would dig those up probably in March because they will start to germinate. I've had them germinate before. The shell bark, the hickories, the walnuts, the butternut won't germinate till late April if you leave them in the ground too long. So 4.5 months is ideal.
The problem with the ground freezing with oaks, where we often don't down here, perhaps.
Yeah. The oaks, I generally direct seed those in the fall. That's my best. I don't carry too many over in the spring. Some I do of the red oak family, but not very many. I try to get them in the ground in the fall. And you've put a lot of nice information out there, Ray, about oaks. I can't add to that. I mean,
we have to plant the red oaks. We have to plant them in February because they will have begun to germinate. But generally, at least where I used to live, the ground isn't frozen, so you can do so. But as you go north, the ground is frozen, and they're going to germinate anyhow in February. Is it the case? Yeah,
they sent. As soon as the temperature gets close to 30 degrees, they'll start putting their root down slowly underground. If I have them in the fridge, I can usually keep them going until I plant them in the spring, but I don't keep them in the fridge anymore. You know, it's tricky. Obviously, it's really tricky with white oaks. You really can't store them very well. But the black and the red oaks, you have a little bit of a safety factor there. But yeah, up here, they start their roots down before everything else greens up. So they're getting a good head start. Just like chestnut and beech will do the same thing.
Yes. There were no other further questions there, but well, you weren't finished with the hard mask. Please go ahead.
Almost finished. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, here's my mesh baskets. I apologize. I don't know why that picture is upside down like that, but I make these mesh baskets myself, and I fill it with sand at the site and some pine needles. And like I say, I put them between 6 and 16 inches underneath the ground, and that keeps them from freezing, and it keeps them in a constant cool temperature all winter long. And there could be 2 feet of snow over the top of these, and the temperature won't change much in the soil. In fact, it probably gets a little warmer, but they get insulated. And on the north side of these pine trees where I put them, there could be a bunch of snow there, and we have 4 or 5 days of 70-degree weather where all the snow melts everywhere except over the top of these, and it just extends my stratification period that much further. And like I say, I aim for 4.5 months with hard mass to get that. Will get my best germination usually. And here some seed I just cleaned. I put them in my basket and washed them in a big 50-gallon barrel I have. Just dip them down there and clean all the sand off, and they're all cleaned up, and I can look them over and see if any of them are splitting, which they normally aren't splitting yet. But once you get them wet like that, I got to plant them right away, because within a few days they'll start to pop, and it's hard to plant a couple hundred shell bark hickories sometimes when everything else is going on. But I will, after I wash these, I'll put them in my fridge to kind of maintain and manage how many of those I want to plant per day. It'll keep them kind of in stasis, whatever you want to call it. Keep them from germinating too fast for me. If I leave them sit out, they'll just all germinate at once, and I don't want to have a bunch of radicals sticking out. So as soon as I get them out of that water, I put them in my fridge and then start putting out 20 or 30 a day, whatever where I'm planting, until I'm done planting. And that usually works pretty well for me.
For people who aren't familiar, this pit storage is virtually the same process as refrigeration, only for larger quantities, perhaps.
Oh yeah, it's basically it's all about getting that cold moist stratification. That's the physiological needs of the seed to break its dormancy for germination. And for me, it works best because if I have a large quantity of seed, I don't want to fill up my seed fridge too much. I put it out in the country, and then I let Mother Nature do the job. So that works out really well.
Very good. I think was that our last group? I'm sorry. Go ahead if you.
Yep, we're done.
Then we have one final question. Do you have any food in your refrigerator?
Well, I have an older refrigerator in the basement that we use it. I use it mainly. I've kind of commandeered it for seeds, and
one just like it. Yes.
Yeah. But it's quite used. It's probably 40 years old, but it still works. And you know what? It keeps my seed secure, and it's very useful for that purpose.
Well, if you have last things, please go ahead, and then I think we go back to Bill Daniels here shortly.
I just appreciate everybody's attention, and there is so much about this propagating of trees and collecting seed and cleaning it, and you can't get it cramped into one probably not even 10 presentations from my point of view. And I know Ray, you've done a lot of presentations on your site.
It's the same problem, Bill. Yes.
You just don't have all the time, but you do the best you can. But it's very worthwhile. The seed is free, as you've mentioned a number of times, and believe me, I try to do things to not create a lot of extra expense, and just be smart about how we do stuff, And some of my work that I do planting trees can be a little backbreaking, but hey, it's worth it in the long run when I have all those seedlings and those nice saplings eventually growing up. So I look at it as just cost of doing some restoration. That's all there is to it. But again, appreciate everybody's attention and thank you very much.
Well, let's return. Thank you, sir. Well, let's return to Bill Daniels, I believe. I think that's what the plan was. Here he is. You're not on, Bill. We haven't got an audio.
All right. Have you got me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Bill. We really, really appreciate it. We have shared a lot of the links in the chat, and hopefully you've been able to capture those. Also, you may contact our committee at seed@indiananativeplants.org, which was also shared in the chat. You can also join us on Facebook, on our Facebook group, Native Seed Communities. And we welcome any pictures and other and videos and et cetera on that. Any questions as well. As has been our pattern, we do these monthly. And I did mention that at the beginning. So we are always looking for speakers. If you know of anyone that has such expertise in growing native plants from seed, especially, or a program or project that you would like to spotlight, please contact the committee. But thanks again, Bill, for your informative session. Also, I'd like to thank not only Ray from Trees from Seed. I don't think I mentioned that. If you're not on his Facebook page, I would highly recommend that. Over 10,000 people are following that terrific page. Also, I'd like to thank Bill Lonberg for helping with many of the technical aspects and some of the background needs. It was good to see you all. We'll sign off for now, and happy growing natives from seed. Bye-bye all.
Bye.